Have you ever wondered how many legends from the automotive world were forgotten? Simply because they didn't have the right name or the loudest design? Because today, we're not here to talk about Mustangs, Camaros, or Chargers. Today, we're opening the secret garage of the 1960s to shed light on the most powerful, rare, and forgotten muscle cars of the decade. Cars with brutal V8 engines, hidden stories, and designs that deserved glory, but were ignored by the world. From luxurious giants with racing souls to discreet sedans hiding true monsters under the hood, this list will make you see the 60s in a whole new light. Before we start, tell me something. Have you ever owned or known a car that was a hidden gem, one that nobody appreciated, but you knew it was special? Share your story down in the comments. Here, every memory counts. Here, every car lives again. If you're passionate about American classics, forgotten muscle cars, and stories that deserve to be told, hit that like button now and subscribe, because this channel is your personal garage, full of power, nostalgia, and discovery. Get ready, because what you're about to see today, you probably never imagined existed. 1966, Mercury Cyclone GT. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you were born with all the power, all the style, but at the wrong time? That's exactly what happened to the 1966 Cyclone GT. A muscle car born roaring, but condemned to live in the shadow of its more famous brother, the Ford Mustang. This car was a true beast, though few remember it. Under the hood roared a massive 390 cubic inch V8, that's 6.4 liters, producing 335 horsepower, enough to launch you from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just about 7 seconds. In 1966, that was pure dynamite. But the story of the Cyclone GT wasn't just about speed. It was a statement of style. Muscular lines, an aggressive grille, racing stripes running along its body like battle scars. Everything about it screamed, "Look at me!" The world was looking at the Mustang. Mercury, as a brand, tried to position the Cyclone GT as something more sophisticated than the Mustang, a muscle car for the man in a suit who still wanted to feel the adrenaline in his fingertips. It was more expensive, more exclusive, and sadly, more forgotten. Only about 13,812 GT units were produced in 1966. To put that in perspective, Ford sold over 600,000 Mustangs that same year. It's not that the Cyclone was bad, in fact, it was incredibly good. It was just eclipsed by the sun of its own solar system. Fun fact, it was one of the first muscle cars to offer an optional automatic transmission with shift performance, a system that delivered gear changes more aggressively, perfect for the street racing scene that was booming in the 60s. Today, finding one in good condition can cost between $40,000 and $65,000, depending on originality and restoration level. But the hardest part isn't paying for one, it's finding one. 1969, Chrysler 300. Hurst imagined being a titan, a true colossus on wheels, and still forgotten by history. That's the case of the Chrysler 300 Hurst, a muscle car that wasn't just huge in size, but massive in ambition. This car didn't come into the world to be subtle. The 300 Hurst was a defiant scream in the roaring golden era of muscle cars. This nearly 2-ton monster hid under its enormous hood a 440 Magnum 5.8 engine, delivering 375 horsepower and over 480 pound-feet of torque. It wasn't the fastest on the track, but its presence demanded respect at every corner. It could reach 125 miles per hour, an impressive feat for a car of its class at the time. And best of all, it sounded like thunder. What's most interesting is that the 300 Hurst was a collaboration between Chrysler and the legendary performance brand Hurst, famous for their racing shifters. The result? A luxury coupe with the soul of a muscle car. White leather interior, gold accents on the body, exclusive wheels, and a fastback rear that made it look like an American spaceship. But here comes the mystery. Only 485 units were ever built. Yes, just 485 in the entire world. Why? Because It was too much of everything. Too big, too luxurious, too expensive. While young drivers were chasing Mustangs and Camaros, the 300 Hurst was meant for an elite that craved brute force without giving up comfort. Today, it's a true collector's gem. A well-preserved example can go for over $100,000 at auctions, and finding one is as hard as spotting a diamond in a river. But there's something money can't buy, the feeling of standing before a car that history forgot, but that once, just once, wanted to be king of them all. Did you know? The 300 Hurst never appeared in Chrysler's official catalogs. It was a special, almost secret project made for the few, and that makes it even more fascinating. 1964, Plymouth Barracuda. Before the world went crazy for the Ford Mustang, another car got there first. Quieter, less celebrated, but equally revolutionary. We're talking about the Plymouth Barracuda, the first true pony car in history. Yes, you read that right. The Barracuda was released 16 days before the Mustang, but almost no one remembers it. It was a car ahead of its time, perhaps a bit too modest in its approach. Visually, the standout feature was its enormous curved rear window, a wraparound piece of glass that remains a masterpiece of automotive engineering even today. But that same design gave it a strange, unconventional look that confused many buyers. Some called it Detroit's weird fish. Under the hood, the Barracuda offered a base 2.8-liter inline-six. But the most interesting option was the 4.5-liter V8, which, in its best version, delivered about 180 horsepower. Not bad for a compact car, but definitely not enough to steal attention from thrill seekers. In its first year, Plymouth sold only 23,443 Barracudas. Sounds like a lot. Compare that to the Mustang's 121,000-plus units, sold in just its first 3 months. That's how crushing the difference was. Ironically, the Barracuda would later evolve into a much wilder and more radical beast in the 1970s. But that original 1964 model was relegated to the failed attempt pile. And it wasn't. It was bold. It was innovative. It just didn't scream as loud as it should have. Today, finding one in good condition is a mission for true enthusiasts. Its price ranges between $30,000 and $50,000, depending on the engine and restoration level. But its real value lies in the story it carries. And you know what's most ironic? The Barracuda didn't just come first. It inspired many others, but the world loves those who make noise and forgets those who arrive in silence. Now that you know its story, don't you think it deserves a bit more respect? Had you ever heard of the '64 Barracuda? Do you think it was unfairly overshadowed by the Mustang? Tell us in the comments. 1969, Plymouth Sport Fury GT. When you think of a muscle car, you probably picture a compact, aggressive machine built to tear up the quarter mile. But the Sport Fury GT asked, what if we take that wild heart and put it in a giant body? Thus was born a true full-size monster with the soul of a muscle car. This car wasn't for just anyone. It stretched over 18 feet long and weighed more than 4,000 pounds. But don't let this size fool you. Under the hood growled a 440 Super Commando 8, pushing a massive 375 horsepower and torque that could move mountains. It could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6.5 seconds, which for a beast of this size was simply stunning. Top speed? Around 130 miles per hour. Yes, this giant could fly. The Sport Fury GT was Plymouth's way of saying luxury and brute force could coexist. Leather seats, chrome details, a surprisingly sleek profile for such a large car, and a GT badge that screamed rebellion. It was the muscle car for the man who wanted space, presence, and power. How many were made? Just over 3,000 units of the specific GT trim in 1969, making it a rare gem in Plymouth's catalog. In fact, so few remember it that finding one at auction feels like spotting a ghost. And if you do, be ready to pay. Depending on its condition, prices today range from $45,000 to $70,000. Fun fact, The Sport Fury GT was one of the last serious attempts to merge the muscle concept with the full-size segment before the oil crisis and environmental regulations of the 70s changed the game forever. 1965, Oldsmobile Jetstar. Sometimes history just isn't fair. And in the world of classic cars, injustice often takes the shape of models like the Jetstar Y, a car that had power, presence, class, and yet was wiped from collective memory as if it never existed. This was the elegant muscle car, the one that showed up to the party in a tux, fists clenched, ready for a fight. It packed a mighty 425 cubic inch rocket 4.8, pushing out 370 horsepower and around 480 pound-feet of torque. That raw power was channeled through a jetaway automatic transmission, allowing it to hit 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 7 seconds, with a top speed near 130 miles per hour. All that in a luxury package. Visually, the Jetstar I was a study in restraint. Long lines, balanced proportions, an aggressive front, and a rear end that commanded respect. It didn't shout for attention with wild colors or flashy decals. Its elegance was its battle cry. But here comes the tragedy. It was launched to compete directly with the Pontiac Grand Prix, another icon of sporty luxury. And even though the Jetstar I had a more powerful engine, better trim, and arguably more soul, it simply didn't sell. In 1965, just over 6,500 units were produced. Why? The public didn't get what Oldsmobile was trying to do. The marketing was muddled, and the name Jetstar Y didn't help. It sounded more like a spaceship than a street machine. Today, it's a unicorn. Seeing one in person feels like discovering lost treasure. Its current value ranges from $35,000 to $55,000, depending on condition. But the real treasure lies in its rarity and the story it tells. Fun fact, the Jetstar, I was one of the first Oldsmobiles to offer front disc brakes as an option, at a time when that was cutting-edge innovation. It was ahead of its time, but the world wasn't ready. 1967, Pontiac Grand Prix SJ. If the 1960s were a grand automotive gala, this car would be that guest who arrives in silence, dressed impeccably, a drink in hand, with a roaring V8 under the hood. Luxurious, fast, and sadly forgotten, the Grand Prix SJ sat trapped in a limbo between executive sedan comfort and raw muscle car performance. The SJ badge, evoking an almost aristocratic exclusivity, came with a potent 428 cubic inch high-output V8, pushing out 390 horsepower and over 465 pound-feet of torque. It wasn't just a style statement. This was a performance machine disguised as a Wall Street executive. It could sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6.5 seconds, impressive for a car of its size, weight, and intentions. And the interior, pure luxury. Bucket leather seats, real wood trim, wraparound panels, and a center console that looked more like the cockpit of a private jet. This was a muscle car for the man who no longer needed to prove anything, just enjoy the ride. But here's the sad part. The Grand Prix SJ was overshadowed by its own lineage. Most buyers opted for the more affordable standard versions or more iconic models like the GTO or Firebird. The SJ, with its higher price tag, became an open secret, reserved for a niche audience who eventually forgot it. Only 5,856 units of the SJ trim were produced in 1967. Today, it's one of the rarest Pontiacs of that era, and one of the most elegant. A well-preserved example can fetch between $60,000 and $80,000. But as always, its true value lies in the story it tells. Fun fact, the Grand Prix SJ was so refined that many compared it to the Buick Riviera or even some Cadillac Coupe, but with a street-smart soul. A car that tried to live in two worlds and ended up not fully belonging to either. Maybe that's why it was forgotten. Too elegant for muscle fans, too wild for luxury purists. A tragic but fascinating combination. Tell us in the comments, are you more on Team GTO's raw power or Team Grand Prix SJ's quiet dominance? 1968 Ford Torino GT. Before the mythical Cobra Jet was born, before the Torino name echoed through racetracks and street corners alike, there was a version few people even remember, the Torino GT. A car born with all the right intentions, but one that quietly slipped through the cracks. And it wasn't for lack of credentials. The Torino GT debuted as an evolution of the Fairlane, sporting a sleeker, more aerodynamic design and engine options that spoke the language of the muscle era. The base engine was a 302 V8, but the real thrill came with the optional 390 cubic inch V8, pushing out 335 horsepower and massive torque. It wasn't the fastest of its kind, but it had presence and personality, design-wise. Assertive without being loud. A narrow grille, dual headlights, muscular sidelines, all saying, "Don't underestimate what I've got inside." It was the car for someone who didn't need to shout to command respect. But maybe that was its downfall. It was too subtle in an era where muscle cars competed just as hard for attention as they did on horsepower. In its first year, the Torino GT didn't hit the sales targets Ford had hoped for, and it was quickly eclipsed by the Torino Cobra in 1969, which arrived armed with the legendary 428 Cobra jet. As a result, the 68 GT was left in limbo, not a full-blown classic, not completely unknown, just forgotten. But today, that very obscurity makes it special. Around 74,000 units of the Torino GT were produced that year, but finding one in original unmodified condition is a real challenge. Prices now range from $35,000 to $55,000, depending on engine spec and condition. Did you know? This very model served as the foundation for some of the wildest prototypes in the later Cobra program. Without it, the legend might never have been born. 1967, Buick Skylark GS400. They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but in the 1960s, that was practically a death sentence in the muscle car world. And if there was ever a car victimized by that mindset, it was the Skylark GS400. A brutal V8 wrapped in a good boy suit, ignored simply for looking too serious. But the GS400 wasn't here to play. Under its hood lived a beast, a 6.6-liter V8, delivering 340 horsepower and more than 450 pound-feet of torque, paired with either a super turbine 400 automatic transmission or a 4-speed manual. The response was instant, the sound deep, and the acceleration ferocious. It could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6.5 seconds. For 1967, that was serious business. Unlike other muscle cars that screamed their presence with stripes, spoilers, and wild paint jobs, the Skylark GS400 was subtle, almost elegant, like a businessman in a suit hiding boxing gloves under the seat. That confused the youth of the time, who wanted cars that looked fast even while parked. The result, it was seen as too mature and failed to connect with the masses. But those who dared to get behind the wheel knew. They knew they were driving a car that could humiliate many of the era's favorites. Buick had struck the perfect balance between refinement and performance. Did you know? The GS400 came standard with an optional limited slip differential and upgraded suspension, which made it not only quick in a straight line, but surprisingly agile through corners. Today, few remember it, but many who've driven one claim it was one of the most well-rounded muscle cars of its generation. Around 16,000 units of this model were built in 1967, making it relatively rare. Its current market value varies with condition and specs, but it can easily reach $50,000 at specialty auctions. 1964, Dodge Polara 500. Some cars were built to impress at first glance, and others, like the Polara, kept their intentions hidden for those who looked closer. It was one of the most underestimated sleepers of its time. Visually tame, even conservative, but with the heart of a track monster. While most saw it as a big, heavy, bureaucratic family car, Dodge offered engine options that transformed it into a beast without warning. The most brutal of them all? The legendary 426 Max Wedge 5.8, producing 425 horsepower with dual carburetors and extreme compression. This engine wasn't just any V8, it was a race block, street legal, and barely tamed. Under ideal conditions, the Polara 500 could run the quarter mile in under 13 seconds. Yes, you read that right. 13 seconds in 1964. That put it on par, or even ahead, of many muscle cars that would be glorified years later. But the Polara never received that kind of recognition. Why? Its image. The design was boxy, mature, more dad car than street rebel. It lacked that rebellious spirit that teens craved in the 60s, and it paid the price. Yet those who knew what was under the hood, they respected it deeply. It was the perfect car to leave everyone behind at a stoplight without even breaking a sweat, a wolf in a tailored suit. Fun fact, the 1964 Polara 500 in drag-prepped versions came with lightweight seats, deleted components like heaters, and minimal interior trim, all in the name of shaving milliseconds on the strip. A pure-blooded racer in disguise. Today, few seek it. Even fewer understand it. But for true gearheads, it's a hidden masterpiece buried in time. Its value varies widely, but original Max Wedge cars can easily exceed $80,000 at auction, if you can even find one. And now we want to hear from you. Did you know about this wild version of the Polara? Do you think these serious-looking cars deserve a place in the Muscle Car Hall of Fame? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice is part of the story we're writing together. 1966. Chevrolet Biscayne 427. Some cars scream power the moment you lay eyes on them, and then there are those that prefer to whisper. The Biscayne 427 was one of those wolves in sheep's clothing. On the outside, it looked like a grandpa car, plain, no frills, no sporty trims. But under that flat, unassuming hood hid a killer V8 that could leave many well-known muscle cars choking on its dust. The secret lay in one very special option, the L7242-7CI V8, a 7.0-liter engine pushing 425 horsepower, originally developed for racing. This block was a legend in its own right, and Chevrolet quietly made it available in one of its most humble sedans, the Biscayne. The result? A badass sleeper with no badges, no stripes, no spoilers, just raw power and no warnings. Acceleration was brutal, 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5.5 seconds, a figure that's still respectable today. But in 1966, it was downright insane. And all of that came in a car that looked like it belonged in a suburban driveway or on a grocery run. So why did Chevrolet do it? Because there was demand. Some enthusiasts wanted power without the flash. They wanted a car they could take to the supermarket and then to the drag strip. Thus was born the sleeper phenomenon, and the Biscayne 427 became one of its purest and most perfect expressions. Only a few hundred units were ever produced with this specific L72 configuration, since it was expensive and never heavily advertised. Today, finding a 1966 Biscayne with its original L72 is like finding a needle in a haystack, a needle worth between $90,000 and $150,000, depending on condition and originality. Fun fact, some of these Biscayne 427s were used by police departments and government agencies. Can you imagine being chased by one of these silent assassins? And there you have it. 10 forgotten muscle cars from the 1960s that, due to design choices, marketing missteps, or pure bad luck, never got the recognition they truly deserved. But today, we gave them back their voice, because here, classics never fade. They roar again. Now it's your turn. Which of these cars surprised you the most? Was there one you'd never heard of before? And if you could bring just one back, which one would you keep forever in your dream collection? If you're into power paired with design, don't miss our next video, the 10 most beautiful muscle cars of the 1960s. It's not just about speed, It's about art, steel, and soul. Click now and join us for another unforgettable ride through the golden age of American motoring. See you there.